Hi, I'm Fiona Stanley. This is a four-part, very short pieces lecture series. I'm aiming to do four of about 5 minutes or so on netnography, which is to say the ethnography of data appearing on the internet. The reason I'm doing this in four parts is so that they can stand alone, and if you're only interested in one of the pieces, you don't need to listen through all of it. The other reason is practical, which is I'm putting these online and it's easier to upload a smaller file. So, netnography, as it sounds, is a portmanteau of net and nography, the ethnography of the internet. Now, the big name associated with this area is Robert Kozinets, that's K-O-Z-I-N-E-T-S. I'll put some links underneath for sources. But that's the name to Google for netnography. Now, it's important if you, obviously during these times of COVID, it's a good approach because you can gather data by simply being online. You don't need to go and start interviewing people or doing an ethnographic study where you would be putting yourself in a place and being a participant, observer, whatever. That's not really possible in these times. Whereas doing an ethnographic study of a phenomenon that exists in online space is still very possible in this time. Indeed, this is actually a really interesting time to be doing this kind of social research because we're obviously living online in ways that we have never done to the same extent until now. So, the first thing that I want to look at in this part is the question of what is online data versus what would be doing something like a literature review. So if you were to look at a newspaper article or an online magazine article, any kind of opinion piece, I would see that more as a source, a piece, an article. I would call that literature in the sense that if you were to review articles and talk about what they were saying and say, you know, this author says this and this author says that, that's like doing a literature review, and I wouldn't call that research as such. I would call that literature reviewing as probably background to doing the research. Where I would see netnography sitting is if you're taking data that's put online, but it was not intended to be a kind of summary article, but it's raw data, if you like. So some examples. I published a paper recently, and again I'll link it here, which was about Instagram, and it was looking at the social media activism and social media posting of so-called unlikely hikers, which is to say people who don't look like the hiking outdoor store advertisements. That's people who are fat, like me, people who are not white, people who are queer, people who are other things, women who hike alone, other aspects of identity which don't really fit into how we picture hikers based on, for example, the Taizo ads where it's, you know, young, fit, skinny, straight guys, white, going off hiking, probably 2 men, 3 men, or indeed a couple, but rarely would you see women hiking alone. So that's online netnography of the Instagram accounts of people who are unlikely hikers, and I was looking at how they portray and perform their hiking identities through their Instagram posting, but also through the Instagram activism. Now that's a raw data set in the sense that when they did that, they weren't, I mean, some of them were advocating, some of them are very much activist in that space, but the purpose of the article is to analyse what's going on there in terms of activism. Another example, Craig White, my colleague in the subject group of tourism and languages, did a really interesting, nice piece recently, a netnography of TripAdvisor, where he was looking at the kind of online visitor book, if you like, the reviews on TripAdvisor of genocide museums across Europe. So again, each of these reviews on its own is a single piece of data, if you like, but together he was looking at how people consume and engage with these sorts of experiences. So that's an example of how you might do netnography with different types of raw data. You might look, for example, at Instagram, you might look at TripAdvisor, you might look at lots of different parts of the internet where people write blogs, for example. You might look at a marketing campaign and compare it to other marketing campaigns. I think one thing that's really interesting at the moment in light of Black Lives Matter is how corporations are scrambling to be virtue signalling or seeming to woke wash themselves, which is like greenwashing in the environmental space. But what they seem to be doing is rushing to display their credentials in that space. And I think you could do a really interesting marketing-led analysis of that as an example of netnography. So that's the end of part one, where we look at an introduction to netnography. In the second part, I want to look at positionality and the question of who is the researcher as that person engages with the research that they're doing.